This section explains the single machine that every cultural turn runs and reads the sensorial turn as one instance of it. Every cultural turn runs the same machine. It attests a blindness, forges tools for what went unseen, diagnoses a turn, institutionalizes it, and thereby captures attention and resources inside a crowded academic economy. The chapter feeds the sensorial turn through its own machine, taking it as the test case. Its broadening is real because perception exceeds the visual. One sense is never enough, yet the very act that opens the sensory horizon installs a blinder, erasing prior work and steering focus for the sake of legitimacy. Broadening and blinding are one gesture read from two sides, the same move rather than two rival verdicts. The chapter's telos is to hold a turn and its shadow at once, using the turn as a filter without swallowing its self-aggrandizement. This part explains why perception refuses to reduce to a single clean channel, and why that refusal is the ground of the social. Perception never resolves into one clean channel. The senses cooperate and contradict at the same time. Plessner calls this synesthesia, a polyphonic composition. It is a contradictory unity rather than a harmonized whole. Their obstinacy is that they refuse the language-centered frame that communication theory imposes on them. Speaking and listening are themselves synesthetic performances. They are body-bound in a double sense. Perception is tied to the perceiver's own body, and within that same perception, the other's body is already primordially apprehended, in the sense Husserl and Schutz give the term. The chapter's move is to make this the ground of the social. Intersubjectivity is constituted pre-linguistically in reciprocal bodily perception. It is not constructed in speech. Get this primitive, and the rest follows. Meaning between two people is seated in the flesh before a single word is exchanged. This section explains how a smell becomes a smell. A smell is what a shared vocabulary lets you pick out of the constant chemical wash you breathe, rather than something the nose simply delivers. Below, language sits raw sensation. Husserl called it hyletic data. Schutz called it petites, perceptions, and undifferentiated something. It becomes a particular smell only through an act that indexes it to an object. You say it smells like thyme, like cinnamon, like grandmother's apartment. Here is the step that does the work. Olfaction has almost no intrinsic quality words of its own, so it borrows the cause as its name. The object individuates the percept, and socialization supplies the objects. The two levels, therefore, decouple. One can speak virtuously of a wine. One cannot actually smell. Perception here is constituted, an achievement of the shared vocabulary rather than a raw given. This section explains why smell, the poorest of the senses, is the one best suited to order social reality. The deficit is the function. Smell's chronic complaint, no geometry, no sides, no shadow, only a binary of attract and repel caught breath by breath against a foil of neutrality, is not what disqualifies it from ordering social reality. It is exactly what qualifies it. A faculty operating beneath reflexive scrutiny sorts more forcibly than one exposed to it. The nose delivers friend and enemy, sacred and profane, clean and foul as inappellable moral verdict, assimilated as close to us as is possible through the breath, before judgment can intervene. Its very marginalization, the double amnesia, the 0 point, is the condition of its pre-reflexive authority. Propaganda weaponizes precisely this. The primitive is this. What escapes reflection governs it. Any sense's world is grounded in what it alone brings out. This layer explains why a perspective you have never lived, you cannot truly perceive. Dürer engraved a rhinoceros he had never seen as plated armor riveted shut. The unknown could only enter him by way of the nearest thing already inside him. That is the whole chapter. A perspective you have not existentially undergone, you do not perceive. You reconstruct it out of your own life world. And the strangeness never becomes familiar. It stays veiled against the known. Karl May is the same move at the scale of an author. He wrote 25 American travelogues before he ever crossed the Atlantic, building a whole continent out of what was already in him. The consequence bounds all of social science. A researcher makes a field's experience visible only through experience she has herself shared. So distance from the field becomes the governing variable. Every piece of data ranks by how much borrowed life world it took to reach it. This section explains what hearing means for a musician playing inside a string ensemble. Hearing, while you play, is an act you perform, positioned in a particular seat. It simultaneously takes in the shared sound and adds your own tone to it. Vollmer's chapter turns Simmel's egoistic organ, the ear that only takes, into its opposite. In a string ensemble, the acoustic reality each musician orients by is the very reality they are collectively producing, so perceiving and producing collapse into one gesture. That double-sidedness is what she names sensuality, perception with a self-reference and an other reference at once. Coordination without a conductor follows, because the medium of agreement is co-authored by the ones it coordinates. This first part explains what mastery of balance really does for a skater. Balance marks you as belonging to the scene. Enabling locomotion is the obvious function, but the deeper one is membership, and that inversion is the whole chapter. A trick is Schutz's pre-designed action, an action that deviates in execution toward either a clean landing or a broken bow. Performing it trains the vestibular, tactile, and auditory channels into a competence that only insiders can read. That legibility is the point. The sensorium becomes a credential. The skater's balance is a costly signal, expensive to fake, so its display constitutes group belonging rather than merely serving locomotion. Predict the general form from here. Wherever affiliation is proven by trained bodily competence, as with climbers, surgeons, and dancers, the private capacity doubles as the public membership token, and skill is the currency of belonging. This section explains how the polishing practice becomes known through the ethnographer's own moving body rather than through observation from outside. The meaning here is read off the instrument's own perturbation. You learn what polishing actually is through your own skating body, by catching it soften, break, veer, and turn careful near cars that have become vulnerable things soliciting care. The knowing does not come from watching the men kneel and circle their cloths. It comes from the body's own change. The ethnographer's flesh is the measuring device, and its datum is its own involuntary reaction. My movements became cautious. Care is not projected outward onto the object. It propagates from the object into the observing body, and the partition between subject and object dissolves. This is the new materialist move. The boundary is what reveals the structure. An interview would return only the modifier's words. Only the co-present sensing body registers a meaning that was never language before. This part explains why the picture of a correct Olympic lift comes from watching others, not from watching yourself. You cannot watch yourself lift. The barbell moves through a body felt from inside, never seen from without. Hebner's thesis is that the picture of how it should look is therefore imported. The trained eye on other athletes becomes the template for a movement you can only sense proprioceptively. Perception of others, not self-perception, seeds the correction. And that seeing runs on Polanyi's from-to structure. Wordless body knowledge points to the explicit. You attend from the individual muscle to the whole lift, never at the muscle itself. Learning a sport is this loop closing. Watch the outside, feel the inside, and let each interpret the other. The mirror is social before it is muscular. This section explains how racism becomes readable across layered media, and why the analysis reads the responses rather than the object. Racism here is not a fact to be cataloged. It is a negotiation, and the negotiation leaves tracks across nested arenas: the rap video itself, the scene media that frames it, and the YouTube comments that answer it. Dietrich's move is to let concepts surface from the audiovisual data rather than impose them. This is the same bottom-up inversion as any grounded theory, now extended to image and sound. Pop culture becomes a representational surface where struggles over belonging turn visible, precisely because the medium records its own follow-up talk. Raid one seed object, then reconstruct the concepts, implicitly guiding each arena that reacts to it. The generative primitive is that meaning lives in the layered response, not in the artifact. This section explains how one felt sensation can carry opposite meanings depending on the cultural horizon that receives it. Two people watch the same execution splash across a deer and gray video and feel the same disgust, yet one recoils while the other awakens. That is the chapter's move. The sensation is the anthropological constant, and its meaning is the cultural variable. Scene members don't decode the disgust away. They feel it exactly as the outsider researcher does. But a socialized horizon, eroguro nansensu, meaning erotic, grotesque, nonsense, reroutes that felt revulsion into satirical social critique. So the disgust itself becomes the fascination. Belonging is holding the decoder. The sense stays fully alive, never muted. In the book's sensorial turn arc, this is the sharpest instance. One stimulus, opposite valence, and the meaning never lived in the percept. This part explains why a man in a dress on the K-pop stage strengthens the very boundary it looks like it is dissolving. A man in a dress reads as gender coming undone, yet the staging hardens the line. It appears to cross. The crossing is licensed, time-boxed, played for comedy, and everyone knows the body underneath. That knowing is what makes the eye jump. The surprise lives in the rupture between seeing and knowing. So scene goers register only the visual, the wig, the dress, the makeup. They never register the changed voice. Perception answers a question the gaze already asked. The man's masculinity is confirmed by how safely he sheds it. A transgression performed inside a fixed frame is how an order maintains itself. That already tells you why female idols cross-dress seriously, never for the joke. This section explains why a self-made costume works as proof of belonging in a cosplay scene. Belonging here is read off the object rather than announced. The self-made costume certifies membership precisely because it is expensive to fake. This is the handicap principle. The honest signal is the one whose cost only a genuine member will pay. Effort, being costly and legible in the material, becomes the currency. The scene grades authenticity along 3 axes: carefulness of production, own work, and attention to detail. Effort, you can see in the seams, is the coin that buys standing. Hence the sharp line the scene draws. On one side stands the cosplayer who sews and presents her own work. On the other stands the fan in a costume who merely bought one. Purchase severs the signal. The artifact can stay identical, yet the belonging it was meant to index evaporates because nothing costly was paid. This section explains how belonging gets managed in digital spaces, and the surprise is that it turns on timing, not on visible content. The usual sociological reading tracks a static quantity, visibility, the scene surface. It misses where the signal actually lives, which is in the derivative, the rate of alternation between appearing and disappearing. Belonging in the digital is drawn by the timing of disappearance, by when something vanishes, rather than by what you keep on display. Schlechter and Grenza's move is to add time to visibility. Snapchat makes the point unmissable. A snap that expires forces perception into a glance, the brief look, and away from the lingering gaze. Their anchor here is Poe's story, the man of the crowd. The boundary of the friendship group gets drawn in that temporal rhythm. Here is the step that does the real work. Belonging operates beneath reflected self-staging, in a pre-reflexive timing that you cannot deliberately compose. This part explains what personhood costs when the senses that sustain it are cut away. Personhood is a relation. The senses keep open between bodies. Hitzler's coinage. Entsinnung, the loss of the sense organs functioning, is a partial Entleibung, distinct from mere Entsinnlichung. It names what modern intensive medicine now manufactures, a human body surviving the severance of every channel through which an alter ego is confirmed. Reciprocity fails. The mirror in which an ego forms goes dark. The vegetative patient becomes a civilizational option, a life-form medicine created rather than found, and an anthropological provocation. It reveals that person was always something bodies confer on each other through sensory reciprocity, dissolving the boundary between human and no longer person from within.